Welcome, everybody. Welcome. If you've been listening to the Dr. Pat Show for the past hour, welcome back to all of you. And for those of you out there that are just tuning in or listening to this through the podcast mechanism, it's great to have all of you. Look, last show you heard me talk about this world. I call it sometimes this world that we cannot see, but we know. We just know. Now, the question really has been for me in my lifetime, and it has been the question of, do I live my life in this level of connection, or is it something that I do when I'm caught between a rock and a hard place? And so what am I talking about? Well, one of the most interesting words that I've come across in, I think it's 16 years now, Benny, 16 years. One of the most interesting words I've come across and know very little about, but completely drawn to it. And you've heard Sarah Main talk about it when she talks about, a timeless wisdom in Sanskrit. But it's a word that on occasion I have mispronounced, rudely pronounced, never pronounced, and to this day, not really sure. But I know when I've seen the word, I immediately tune in to something about it. Some people say Deva. Some people say Diva. Some people talk about it in different ways. But today, my very special guest, an author and much more, Jacquelyn E, joining me here today, is the author of a book that so explains to me why in my own life, and many of you, I know you've gone through this, why situations that should have turned out, I can't stand that word, but I need to say it, should have turned out really awful because of something else that maybe you tapped into, you got another possibility. But what is it that we can learn about this kingdom and our relationship with natural spirits that provide us with possibilities, potentiality, and high performance solutions for life? What is it about this we know, but yet we are holding back to implement? Today, I've got somebody here that's going to give us a modern view of some timeless wisdom that could be the answer to a lot of stuff. Jacquelyn, great to have you here.
Thank you. It's a privilege and a pleasure.
Am I saying your name right, Jacquelyn?
You are.
Did I get that right? And how did I do with Diva? How did I do with that? Deva. I knew I got it wrong. So I'm going to hear from Sarah Main on that. Deva.
I think if you think about I'm not an expert on that in the slightest, but when you think about how the Spanish and the Italians say the letter E,
that's it.
It's more an A, isn't it?
And I should know that.
Probably Deva, but I'm not an Indian speaker, a Sanskrit speaker.
No, but you're right about it, because you're absolutely right. But here's the thing I want to talk to you about. It doesn't matter how I say it. When I see the word, something happens to me.
Sure.
Okay. And I was talking to, oh my gosh, Benny, another table tennis story. Okay. So in the last show, I talked about my Japanese partner, right? But I myself and, Dipti, we own the rights to the gold medal here in Washington State, right? In this sport. And she is a woman from India. And so when you play things, or when you get in relationship with people, that have something unusually insightful that you've never had the opportunity in my life to experience. There's a realm that we get to explore, and I think this is part of the realm that you're talking about in this book. See, I can't explain to you why every time I see that word, whether it's the name of a woman that does music. So I want to ask you about this. What is the energy that this brings forward that's also in your book? It's an energy, isn't it?
It is. And I struggled for quite a few years to actually try and convey that energy in writing. When I started it way back in 2006. And 2006, 2007, I wrote quite a lot at the prompting of a Scottish farmer friend. But it was coming out very academic. And I thought, oh, I mean, academic writing is kind of easy for me anyway.
Yeah, it is for me too.
Yeah, but I realized that I wasn't striking the right note, quite literally, with it. So I put it away, and over the following 10 years, I kept, going back to it. I had all the files on my computer, and all the material was all there. But I just let it percolate away sometimes. I think today people are wanting to get things out in a hurry. But I think the lasting things and the deep things actually take time. They take time for you to digest them. They take time for you to mature in your thinking, or at a more subtle level. And in 2017, I just suddenly knew I had the key to it.
Oh.
So that's when I, sat down and got back to it. 2017, 2018 were totally dedicated to the book. So it was about, instead of, I think, because we, particularly in the West and modern West, we've got this separation thinking going on.
Yeah.
So, and that's our sort of modus operandi. And especially if we're quite sort of mental beings, in the sense of, we use our mental body a lot, then we forget that actually the connection is more subtle than that. And to make that connection with other people, we need to get into that mode of feeling the connection, and then it comes out in the words.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting to me, and I'm so glad that you did write this. And it has been extremely difficult, especially when you're talking with other people. When you're trying to explain an experience, right? But this has been a timeless conversation that we as humans have had, going way, way back to even before we could actually speak a language, right? We have seen glimpses of this notion of this this subtle world, as you call it, our relationship with the subtle world. And as time has gone on, the language has shown up through imagery and visualizations. I wanted to ask you about this because our modern culture, our pop culture, right? Some people call it pop. I like to call it our modern culture. The thing that taps us into digital, radio, television, the whole thing. We have never had more content based on storytelling, fae communities, fairies, gnomes, angelic. We have never had more content coming to bear on this than ever before. What do you think is calling for this message, the thing that called you to put this in writing? What is being needed to what is being called for, right?
Well,
Because
I think it's
you know what I'm
quite
trying to say?
simply connection.
Yeah.
I think it's connection. I think I think we've so divorced ourselves, particularly from nature, and decided that, you know, we can do whatever we like to it, that we've lost that sense that everything is interconnected. And I think, you know, this is a key theme in the book, is how why do we say that we're interconnected? What is the mechanism? And it's this Deva Kingdom that's the mechanism.
Yeah.
But it gets a little more highbrow than that, in the sense that um, this kingdom of Deva connects us to matter. So if we think of ourselves as spiritual beings, we're here, but we're here in a body, right? We're here in bodies. Bodies are made of matter. So we're engaging with matter. This world is full of matter, and you can define matter as solid, liquid, gas, but it's more than that. It's also the emotions that we use. So we tend to, we've disconnected so many things so much that we don't realize that actually our emotions are matter and our thoughts are matter.
Yeah.
They're just more subtle matter. So and Deva is the intelligence within matter of all densities. So from everything from something solid like this table that my computer's standing on, right through to liquid, to gas, to what ageless wisdom calls the etheric.
Yeah.
Then up to the astral level, which is our emotional level, the mental level, and then on up there to the soul level, to Buddhi, Atma, and so on. You know, up and up you go. So when we realize that matter's the connecting point, we're actually connected through all these different layers and levels and subtleties of matter. And this seems to me to be, I actually, Dr. Pat, I actually didn't really tumble to this core of it until I was writing it.
Yeah. There's a part in the book which you call simultaneous creation. Did I get that right? There's a part in the book that you call simultaneous creation, and I stopped there and I read through this a couple of different times, because I think we underestimate ourselves. I think we underestimate ourselves in a lot of ways, and what we're capable of, and you know what we're capable of knowing. And I'm not talking about studying, not that. I'm not talking about going taking a course or getting a degree. I'm talking about a different sense of knowing that nature spirits have, you know, we see them. We see them in the way they're portrayed. It doesn't matter what you pick up, look, hear, sound, smell, watch on television, they're portrayed in a certain way. Do you think that we have forgotten what we have inside of us?
Yeah, yes, I do. And partly because we're looking for it outside.
Yeah.
Right? You know, we're looking for, very few people stop long enough to actually make the connections with their house, with their surroundings, with whatever. I mean, even if you live in a city, you can still make those connections. And there's a wonderful book called, oh my goodness, you know, my brain's just gone. Anyway, it's about, The Songs of Trees. That's right. And it's by, anyway, it's called The Songs of Trees.
Oh, yeah.
And in that book, he talks about, he's a botanist, and he talks about how trees in places, say like New York City, you know, how you have these lovely little trees in some of the streets and then surrounded by some wire, iron. But just having a tree in the street in a city creates a magnetic point for people to come and gather. And they like to look after the tree, and it just creates that point of contact. So we must have this innate thing about nature that we've kind of forced aside in our desire for things, because that's what the emotional body does. It desires stuff, and the desire to invent and to make all the technological things we've made. But in doing that, we've lost some of the stuff that the indigenous American people had, that our Maori in New Zealand had, and the Aboriginals and cultures all over the world had before we got distracted.
Oh yeah, you're absolutely right about this in more ways than one. And that's why when we come back from break, I want to talk to you about the chapter in your book. And I just love that I didn't expect this chapter to be in your book, but it's the chapter on emotion. I want to talk about this when we come back. There's something right in the book that you say humans apparently drew the short straw in the evolutionary stake. So we learned the hard way through pain.
Yeah.
Oh. And so I think we're at the point now where there's a new realization to be had, because pain is pretty much killing us. Let's take a short break. When we're back, when we come back with Jacquelyn, we have 3 copies of the book to give away. Take a short break, everybody. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back. I am so thrilled to, first of all, I want to thank Jacquelyn for joining us here today, but also we really do have 3 copies of this book to give away. Jacquelyn, can we take a moment, first of all, to let people know the book, where it's available, how it's available, where they can find out more information, and then especially about you?
Well, they can encourage their local bookstore to stock it, would be a good idea.
Okay.
And then you can get it from Inner Traditions, the publisher. It's available on Barnes and Noble, and on the other outlets like Amazon. One of in IndieBound, I believe it's on IndieBound in the States.
Okay. Yeah.
Now I must point out, though, for listeners outside of the USA, it's available now in Canada and the UK, but it is not yet available in Australia or New Zealand. I actually only received a copy from Manzanita a couple of days ago. So so I hadn't held it in my hand before then. So Australia and New Zealand, it won't be here until probably mid to late August because of COVID-19 delays.
Yeah. And also, how do they find out about you directly? What's your website?
I have a website. Now, my name is a little complex to spell, so they can go to tallpixie.com. So just Tall Pixie, there's a story behind that, but it's easier for people to remember. It's the name of my shop. I'm an artist as well as a writer, so they will find a lot of art on the site. I have a blog, which at the moment I'm doing 2 things. I'm promoting other artists' work, sometimes my own if I have any new stuff, but I'm also writing a series on our time living in Egypt, my husband and me.
Wow.
And that was pretty interesting. So
we could do a whole nother show on we could do a whole nother show on that. One of the things that for me personally, that going through my life experiences and then going through my corporate world, one of the things that was a complete disconnect for me and really was a lifelong journey in rising from a clerk male position, pushing a mail cart, to a corporate executive, was this idea about where emotions should be and where they should not be. Leave your emotions at home. Nobody wants, right? There's no crying in baseball. I mean, we could go on about it, but I love the way you talk about this because, I have always felt for myself that emoting, or however we describe it, was of a higher order than the physicality of our body. And what I
Mm.
mean by that is that there's something underneath it that just hits a person to a place which brings them to emotion that expresses itself in a physical form. And I wanted to talk to you about this because you talk about the evolution, human versus, right? Uh, but I loved what you included in this chapter. And most people do not talk about emotions and the truth and the astral plane. So, Benny, let's give our first copy away. 1-800-930-2819. Let's give our first copy. Is this right here? Is this humanity's greatest challenge in the world we
At the
live in
moment,
today?
yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes, because what we've got to remember is, well, from the perspective of metaphysics and ageless wisdom, we've descended into matter, and over a long period of time. And at the bottom of that is having a physical body. Okay, so for probably millions of years, much longer than the anthropologists currently claim,
Right.
we were developing this physical body, learning how to use it, how to breathe it, how to digest, how to do all those things that the physical body does. I mean, it's not something that goes snap snap and it's all there. It's something that in materiality you have to develop. And this is what initiations are about.
Yeah.
Okay, they're about getting to the point where you are no longer driven by those drivers of that particular stage. So you're no longer driven in the first instance by appetite, by sexual drivers, by all these things that the physical body gives us for our physical survival. But when you're no longer driven by that, but you're starting to be driven by emotion and desire and those kinds of feelings, then you're moving into the next phase of development, because the emotions or that plane of desire, that which is also called the astral plane, is a finer density of substance. And this is the key, is to understand that the universe, or we'll just talk about Earth, but we're dealing with different levels of substance here. So the physical is the densest, then there's the liquid, then there's the gas, then there's the etheric, which is the blueprint for our physical body, and then there's the next finest above that is the big astral plane. Each of them say they've got 7 subplanes, and then above that is the less dense mental plane, and so it goes on up and up and up. And each of those different levels requires a different level of consciousness to access it. So we, at the same time, we're developing different levels of consciousness.
Yeah. One of the things I wanted to ask you about, because I was reading through the book and I had this moment, right, where I was reflecting upon what happens when there is something that you want to fully express. What happens when there's that thing you want to fully express, and for whatever reason it doesn't get expressed, or you're not able to connect with something outside of yourself, right? And I thought about this in reading parts of your book, but then I got to the section on thought. And one of the things that I've had to discover for myself is when I ask a question to God, the universe, goddess, whatever that is I do, I ask a very simple question and I almost immediately get an answer. And I've been doing that for a number of years now. Most of my friends in the meditation community say, Pat, that's not meditating. And
I disagree. It's actually occult meditating.
Is that what it is?
Yes, that's what it's called. Yeah.
But I'm reflecting upon it because I was reading in the book about the quality of thought. And so I want to talk with you about the intelligence that you reference in the book. I sit down and I'm fully present and I ask the question, what is mine to do today? And I don't always hear, do this, do that. Sometimes there's an image that'll pop in. Sometimes there's a thought that'll pop in. Sometimes there's emotion that'll pop in. And, the question that I ask you is, how do we help each other understand what you're referencing here as the quality of thought? Because when we talk about that, it's very different than the way you describe it. But boy, I'll tell you, it is essential for the time that we're living in, don't you think?
Yeah. So your question is about the quality of thought?
Yeah. How do we build a level of trust for the thoughts that we have? So for me, I've done this enough that I know when I get an answer after 3
okay.
seconds,
I see what you mean.
I know it's the answer. I don't say, give me best 2 out of 3.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay. I get what you're saying now. Well, it goes back to that, the difference. You talked about meditation. There's most people who are meditating in a mystic way, right? They're kind of floating off and wanting to disappear into the ether, wherever, right? Occult meditation is doing exactly what you're doing, which is getting into that state of stillness, but you're asking a question, right? And so you're actually raising the meditation to a level of connectivity with a higher level of consciousness. Okay. Now that's not to decry mysticism. I'm not doing that.
No.
I'm just saying that it's a different avenue, right? And in the ageless wisdom teachings, we're told that actually this is the next stage, because the soul is sitting in the highest 2 planes or 3 planes of the mental plane, subplanes of the mental plane. So actually we need thought to be able to get up that high. And it may well be your soul that's actually answering you. Right?
Yeah.
And your soul is connected to every other soul. I mean, we're getting into some pretty heady stuff here.
That's good.
So the soul is definitely connected. That the soul meditates, we are told, on its own plane with other souls, but it also meditates when we get to a certain point of our evolution. It's meditating downwards to us, paying attention to us. And sometimes, even if we're really good at this stuff, sometimes we feel like we can't make a connection. And it's said that that's because at those times the soul is actually busy elsewhere. It's meditating on its own plane, or it's working higher up or making connection further up, because we don't just stop at the soul, we keep on going. The masters exist. Their consciousness rests way above the level of soul. So what I think you're doing is you are actually elevating your thought, you're getting out of your emotional body, you're getting out of that, and making your thought pure enough to get an answer from higher up your own chain of being.
And for me, when I moved through the book, one of the things that I really stopped and studied was the diagram in the book on Deva We Create. And in this part of the book, I really found it fascinating to me about intentional design and so forth. And my friend says that to the point where our electromagnetic energy distorts our way of being, then we have to wonder if we can trust our way of being. Now, that is a really deep thing. I mean, I'm
It
still
is.
thinking about what my friend said to me, right? But I totally get it at some level. In the book, you really have put a new way to think about these material things we're creating,
Mm.
as if they didn't have a an energetic zone. That's the way we operate sometimes. We operate as if we're building a thing,
Mhm.
but we don't necessarily take into consideration, the wildest sense of it. And I wanted to talk about this a little bit because when we say the word create, like we say, what do you want to create to somebody? They're not thinking about something esoteric, or they're not thinking about maybe communicating with another kingdom or another realm. I want to ask you this question. How many natures from what you've written in the book, how many different natures are we tapping into under the guise of creation?
Oh, that's a really interesting question. Um, I need to remember that question because it's something that's definitely worth contemplating. How many
I think
natures?
about it a
Um,
lot because,
yeah.
but I waited to ask you.
Oh, goodness. Well, I think it's a dance between a whole lot of levels, um, because we're not compartmentalized, and for instance, you will find people, particularly in the science community, who are very advanced mentally, but actually you get the feeling that they have not developed their emotional body particularly well, right? So we can kind of leap ahead of ourselves, and what we tend to, so another time they'll come back in another lifetime and they'll sort their emotional, learn their emotional body. um, so I think that what we're doing, and we're very complex because we're using so many different levels of being all at once, and we're swapping and swapping between them. And some of them we got control of, and some of them we haven't. And I think that this breeds a lot of chaos, within. And yeah. Uh, and then when those of us who, like you, are pretty sensitive to, you know, your internal workings and what's going on around you,
That's so true.
yeah, then we have that added into the mix. I'm constantly surprised by having to realize that actually other people don't pick up all the stuff that I'm picking up. And so I think makes life much easier for them because it's much more cut and dried. But it means that they're shut off from the effects of what they do, their effects on other people, their effects on their own development, their effects on nature. Um, let's just take something simple like the
Yeah.
weeds in my drive.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Um, I could go and buy a pack of, I won't name it, but
Yeah.
one of the potent poisons that I could
Right.
go spray on it, or I can go to my kitchen and I can get um, a bulk refillable jar of white vinegar
Right.
and spray that on it, or I can pour boiling water on it, right? First of all, though, I would explain to the plant why it's not appropriate for it to grow there, and I'm really sorry. Um, And in the book, as you know, we're talking about the different levels of Deva. So
Yeah.
we can deal with these lower levels quite happily and easily, give them with time to withdraw back to their source, and pour the vinegar on it or the boiling water. And we don't have to poison everything, people, to get rid of our weeds. So I'm sorry, I've probably kind of digressed.
No, you
But
didn't. You didn't, because if we use that as a real example, which you did, it's also a metaphor. I mean, we can also take it metaphorically. And I love that you brought that up, because I was out in the garden yesterday. Okay. But you're bringing up three things. If I could ask you to comment on them. And Betty, please, let's give another copy of the book away. 1-800-930-2819. And let me see if you can elaborate on this. But you didn't really digress. You're giving an example that I never thought in the life I had up until age 40. I never thought that I'd be having a conversation, Jacquelyn, with someone like you, and we would be talking about a book that's called Deva, and we'd be talking about the fact that this is about relationships with the subtle world, and that I would even have a halfway curious question to ask you. Now, why do I believe that? Because my life then was very different. But I know this now today, and that's why I love your weed story. I know this now today. I know that everything, every moment, every aspect of that world and beyond, those relationships with the subtle world, many, 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 many times for me, were the difference between life, death, school, homeless, love, hate. And when you talk about this, I am struck by two things. And I wish I would like to talk a little bit. I happen to learn about indigenous rituals, relationships with the earth in the oddest way, but I did. In 1997, I was asked to go out with a woman who became my mentor on a vision quest. She had been doing it for 30 years. And I was asked to go out so I could steal all of her ideas from my boss so that we could create something like that so he could make money. Well, I know I had to share this with you because it is related to the weeds and the story you're telling. But lo and behold, the subtle world doesn't let you do that, does it?
No.
No. And so what happened with that was I came back not the same person from 10 days in a desert, experiencing what it's like to live on water, to be with nature, to do all of the above. I was different. But here's what I'll say to you. My mentor allowed us to write it down. When I came home, I wish I would have had the wheat story you're telling today. Because the experience, and then it led me on a whole other experience as I work with young people in a coming of age program based on the Lakota traditions. But here's the thing I want to say. You just described a ritual that has to do with an unseen energy to honor another living entity on the planet. And there's something powerful about that. Now, I don't know if you used hot water or if you used vinegar, but you had a conversation. And I can't tell you how important that is, but your book talks about that. And I wonder, what can we do from your perspective, Jacquelyn? What can we do to remember that part of us? Because it is a part of it. I mean, look, I'm a girl from the Bronx. I never thought in a million. Look, my father poured cement on the backyard. So to find myself in a medicine wheel in the high desert of California talking to rattlesnakes who didn't want to share a rock ledge, honestly. But let's talk about what you just said and how that is a pivotal point for our culture in the world we live in today.
Yeah, it is so. We have such different experiences growing up in different places, you know. Um, I was very lucky in the sense that there was a playing field. Was They played cricket and rugby and stuff on this playing field, and and it was surrounded. This playing field was surrounded by what we call green belt. In other words, it was kind of park area, hilly, because the city I grew up in is very hilly.
Yeah.
And then when I was 5, my parents moved to Western Samoa. So, and it's very jungly. It's hot, and it's tropical forest, rainforest. So, I got to play in these places which were very, very natural. And we're talking about the 1950s here. It was 54 when we went to Samoa, and there was no television. We didn't have television. I know
Right.
today wouldn't even, can't imagine that, right? No television. Radios, we didn't even have transistor radios till I was 14. Okay, so, and a transistor, to those who don't know, is a little radio that you can walk around with. Today you do it on your phone. But a radio in those days was a big thing that stood on the floor. Okay, so, and you had an old-fashioned telephone that was run by a person in a room connecting everybody together through wires. So it was very, very different, and there were no distractions. You weren't looking at a tablet all the time. You weren't on the internet all the time. You were actually in the moment doing what you were doing. The school over there, it was only a few hours a day because it was too hot. And then we'd go home. My mother was a school teacher. We'd have lunch, we'd have a sleep, and then she'd take me and my brother to the beach and we'd swim. Coral reefs, angelfish, you name it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Paradise. So, and in New Zealand, coming back to New Zealand when I was 7, there again, surrounded by nature. So I remember a girl that I was friendly with, and I went to stay with her, and she lived in a hotel in the city, right? And there was no green around her at all. And she loved coming to my place because we had green around us. So I think it's a number of all these things that have piled up together. And I loved lockdown because I wasn't being bombarded with stuff that, I really don't need. So I can't speak for other people, but I have met people who are terrified of going near a tree or can't walk on anything but a pavement. And it horrifies me because there is so much wonderful experience to be had, as you found out, in a desert
Yeah.
or in a forest,
Yeah.
just in a beautiful garden. But cities have gardens. Go sit there. Go sit under a tree in those gardens. New York's got the wonderful Central Park,
Oh,
and it's just beautiful. Just so you just have to take whatever opportunity you have to forget about your phone, forget about all these things that you think are so essential, and go sit with nature and just be in the moment. That's
yeah.
all I can say.
Well, and let's talk about what that does, because sometimes when, I find myself sometimes when I do these shows and I have conversations, it may seem counter to the way I live my life. And I want to talk about this because, what do those times in my life, even like today when I'm done, right? This is my morning. It started at 6 this morning. When I'm finished with this show, I will walk out in my yard in bare feet, and there's a reason I do it. one of the misconceptions I find and, want to address is from your book is the idea that you cannot be spiritual or spiritually connected and achieve things in the world, highly successful. And because remember, once upon a time when we thought if you're spiritual, you're not making money, you're not doing art, you're not writing books, you're not consulting in corporations. And in the world we live in today, if I would take the principles in the book and the things you talk about in your book, and we combine that human being and human doing with these subtle world entities, I've often thought about how the amount of brain matter we use would be elevated from 11% to higher.
Mhm.
Because I do think that we're missing the energy of wisdom that was given to us. I
Mm.
really do. And not just to sit and talk and just think about it, but why were we given it and then given our physicality if we were not to be doing something? I don't know. Can you help me with that maybe?
Well, I think we have to go back to something else that's in the book, and that's the motive behind our intentions. Okay. So whether we're working in business or whether we're working in art or whether we're sweeping the street, what's our motive? There are endless different ways to do things and to approach things. So, commerce, as I pointed out, and this really surprised me, the Deva of commerce pointed out that it's part of the Deva of communication. And to communicate is to commune with something, right? It's not to be separate, it's not to exploit something, it's to commune, to be with it. But what we've done is that, particularly in the corporate world, as you know from your experience going out into the desert and why you were there, what you were supposed to be doing there and couldn't do there, was you were there to commune with the desert, whereas your boss was not there to put you in touch with the desert. He was there to exploit something. Okay. So we don't have to have commerce that exploits a large number of people to benefit a very, very small number of people. We don't have to do it that way. It's not like it's the only way to do it. And we don't have to go the communist way either. We are so inventive, but
Yeah.
we can't get to a new way of doing those things until we say, hang on a minute, what's my motive behind doing it this way? What's my motive? Like the guy's motive that sent you off to the desert, his motive was to exploit somebody else. If his motive had been different, then he would have got a different result.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that is core, and that comes back to both our emotional and mental decisions, doesn't it? So the emotional body is the body of desire. It's wanting. That guy was wanting something more. He was being greedy. Okay. He wanted something that somebody else had, and he wanted it for himself, but only in terms of money. Okay. So this is part of the problem that we're grappling with. We're grappling with our desire body. And people who also have a good mental grasp of how business can be exploited, and they've got this out of control emotional body, of course they're going to exploit people because they're not examining the motives behind what they're doing.
Yeah. And, that's really brings me back to not just the many different ways you talk about this in the book, but also the many different ways you demonstrate to us, or at least shine a light on how amazing we really are.
Hmm.
And if we would remember that and get back to something very core and innate to all of us, this would be transformative in itself. Jacquelyn, thank you so much for today. Please let folks know one more time how they can get a copy of the book and also find out more about you.
Okay, it's called Deva, Our Relationship with the Subtle World. The publisher, Inner Traditions, you can buy it direct from them. You can buy it from Barnes and Noble. You can buy it on Amazon. You can buy it in Indie Bound, or you can ask your local bookstore to please stock it, and you'll probably you can find it on my website, not to sell, but you'll find all the references about it, tallpixie.com. Okay.
Thank you. Yes, thank you. Last question. What's your personal message? What would you like to leave us with today?
Stop running around and just be where you are and feel the aliveness in every single thing that surrounds you. Whether it's a tree or the wall in front of you or the painting or whatever, it's created out of matter. You're created out of matter. That's your connection. Your connection is the Deva within that matter, the intelligence that enabled those things to come together.
Thank you so very much. Wow, Jacquelyn Lane, everybody. Lots to think about today, but more importantly, there is a connection. There is a connection that's available to all of us. It's there. And so, as my dad used to say, the ball's in my court. Let's take a short break, everybody. Thank you for tuning us in, turning us on. Benny, thank you. Olivia, thank you. We'll see you next time.